certain that if they went to them, they would cooperate more with the government than I would. They'd be more persuadable not to publish things than I would. So I've always had a very prominent component of my work be media criticism. Obviously, appearing more on Fox than MSNBC and CNN is something that's new. But I think that's because the views that I've always espoused, the kind of values I've always embraced, are heard more on Fox and than CNN and MSNBC, where they're not welcome.
That is kind of amazing, though, right? Because 15 years ago, Fox News was the national security network, and CNN was a critic, or MSNBC in particular. What has changed that? Is it simply the fact of before and after Donald Trump, or that Republicans are out of power, or partly out of power, so they want to attack the government, and liberals or progressives are in power, so they want to protect the government?
I actually think the primary impetus originally was the reliance on Russiagate as the principal theme of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Once you start positing that there's some evil foreign villain bent upon wreaking havoc inside the United States, and that the political opponent domestically is aligned with that foreign power, that's a already kind of very jingoistic way of looking at the world. You stimulate fear of and hatred toward a foreign enemy, and suddenly you want to be protected from that foreign enemy. On top of which, Russiagate itself emanated from the bowels of the CIA, the bowels of the U.S. security state, which was feeding leaks to the Washington Post and the New York Times. And liberals began viewing those security state agencies, the hatred of which has always been fundamental to left-wing politics for decades, as not just their allies, but these kind of guardians of all that was good and decent in the world. And that began this radical transformation about these kinds of questions.
So there's two things I want to kind of ask about. One is, when Hillary Clinton was doing this, I mean, was she being purely cynical because it's like, okay, Russiagate is, she gets screwed with her, Russia or Russian hackers, spreading her emails that make her look bad, and she's in a race that should have been a layup, and she really screwed the pooch on that. Is she just doing this out of, just rank opportunism, or is she channeling her, her inner Goldwater girl, where she is really terrified that Russia or a foreign power is taking over America?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of authenticity to it. If you look, for example, at what the Clintonian project was in the early 1990s, it was to take the Democratic Party out of the hands of the left and to put the power in the hands of corporatists and centrists and the kinds of people who are status quo guardians of ruling class orthodoxy. But then Hillary Clinton herself, and I think people didn't realize this at the time, including me, that there was a lot more dissent about foreign policy taking place inside the Obama administration than was widely known. Obama himself was somebody who, ironically, if anybody should be accused of being soft on Putin or trying to appease the Kremlin, it was he. A primary line of attack on him was that he was too soft when it came to confronting Russia. That was the famous Mitt Romney line in 2012. Rubio and John McCain and Lindsey Graham, the kind of militarists in the Republican Party, constantly attacked him on that ground. The main specifics were his refusal to arm the Ukrainians based on his view that Ukraine was never going to be a vital interest to the U.S., but always would be to Russia. His refusal to confront the Russians in Syria and overthrowing Bashar al-Assad and kind of constraining the CIA. And his biggest critic inside the Obama administration, insisting that Russia was a far greater threat than Obama was recognizing, was Hillary Clinton. So she was already prone to this hardline interventionism, militarism, already looking at Russia as this grave and central threat. That was her primary split with Obama. And so when this opportunity presented itself to tie Trump to Russia, of course, part of it was opportunistic, but I think part of it grew out of her actual worldview.
What is the essential link between kind of corporatism in America and the CIA or the deep state? Is it the military industrial complex, or is it a deeper fusing of kind of big government and big business that neither the left nor the libertarian right kind of can really grapple with?
I think, one of the things that the left and right has in common is an awareness that our government has essentially been co-opted by corporate power. The richer you are, the more powerful you are within the corporate world, the more power you exert in Washington, which isn't how a democracy should function. It's how a democracy does function. And that means, in general, that there aren't radical divisions between, say, health insurance companies or Wall Street investment
Mhm.
firms and hedge funds on the one hand, and say General Dynamics and Raytheon and Booz Allen on the other, the kind of
Yeah.
espionage and military contractors. It's a very united ideology. It's the ruling class ideology. They fund both parties with equal vigor, some more than one more than other, depending on the circumstances. But in general, they wield a lot of influence within both parties. I think that ideology prevails regardless of the outcome of elections. And so I think absolutely there's a union between state power on the one hand and corporate power on the other. You see that, for example, with how big tech censors. They don't censor in a way that undercuts or subverts Washington policy. They do it in a way that promotes it. They're censoring now anyone questioning the U.S. and NATO war aims in Ukraine. That's not a coincidence. And so, ironically, Democrats are very obsessed with finding fascism under every rock. If you look at the academic definition, one of the primary prongs, one of the most menacing, is the merger of state and corporate power, which I think does lie at the heart of the establishment liberal project in the United States.
And that has either remained intact or is struggling to stay intact since the end of World War II.
It's, I think, been a constant kind of tension, and I think those tensions have been largely resolved. I mean, it's why you see, for example, corporate America fully on board with the wide range of corporate, of liberal cultural positions about feminism and about LGBT issues and things that
it's great. Well, Pride Month just ended, in June, right? And Raytheon and Halliburton, everybody has
and the CIA.
Yeah, the CIA.
Exactly.
How as a gay man, do you laugh harder than I do as a straight man when you see the ad where the CIA has a Latina, who I think is also, a lesbian or something,
and she has all like the full panoply of like millennial mental health pathologies that they're proud of her for having. I'll tell you, the first time I saw it was when I did the Snowden reporting. What I realized was the GCHQ, which is the British version of the NSA, always tried to go a little bit further and demonstrate its willingness to transgress legal limits just a little bit more, because in general, the British compensate for their collapsed imperial project by trying to maintain relevance through just being a little bit more unethical and illegal. And the first time I ever really noticed this was when the GCHQ in 2015 bathed its very futuristic UFO-looking headquarters with the colors of the rainbow flag to celebrate some sort of LGBT identity day or other, and specifically to make penance for what they did to Alan Turing during the war when they drove him out of the British security services for being gay, even though he was cracking all the Nazi code. And, I asked myself, why is the GCHQ one of the worst and most menacing surveillance agencies on the planet raising the rainbow flag? And obviously it's because they cynically understood that this was a way of getting liberals and even parts of the left to view them as more benign, as more benevolent, and this kind of ideology became both a tactic, but I also think a driving belief system.